A viewer asked me how I organize my palettes, and honestly, it's made me stop and think about my process. So today I thought I'd chat a little about my palettes and share some of the color mixing habits and ideas that help make my painting process feel more simple and more streamlined. Even though I use a limited palette, many of the color theory tips I share will be helpful regardless of the palette you use. There's definitely no single right or wrong way to organize your own colors, but over time I've developed a system that works for me. I'll walk you through how I separate certain colors, how I decide what belongs where, and some of the small adjustments I make depending on the project I'm working on. For example, here you can see almost two identical palettes, one using granulating ultramarine blue and another using phthalo blue, simply to suit the particular painting I was working on at the time. Some of the paintings I'm sharing here today do have tutorials or YouTube videos if you'd like to paint along, so I'll include links for those in the description below. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so these are my palettes. I've just picked them up, and this is the state they're in currently, just kind of from the most recent projects I've been doing. And I thought I'd kind of go ahead and explain why I have my colors arranged the way I do, and also explain a little bit of color theory, because I think that's the foundation to making decisions in terms of how you mix your color and where you're going to want to put your color in your palettes. There's not a right or a wrong way. It's really more a matter of finding the workflow that works for you and the painting that you're working on at that time. And I actually find having just a smaller amount of pigments to work with at a time is really helpful for like keeping things more streamlined, straightforward. I can track what I'm working with. And so I really like being able to just pick up one of these palettes. And as you know, I don't always have a lot of room in my camera screen here. So sometimes I'll just bring in one at a time and work with it. And then I'll move that aside and I'll pick up another one. And so it works well for me to use these little palettes, and they tend to change based on the project I'm working on. There's definitely be projects where I lean in more into one color or another. You'll notice this particular palette here, I'm going to be discussing here in a minute. This is my warm color palette, sort of warm right now, a little bit of a mixture. But you'll notice when I was painting my tulip last year, I was using a lot of warm colors, and you can see the only sort of cool color here is that green. There's really no need to have any green on this palette. In some cases, if I was using a lot of oranges and yellows in a particular painting, I would probably clean these two wells out, get that paint somewhere else so that I could use these wells and really make this palette very orange, yellow, kind of red centered. Because so many of my decisions, I think, are really based on color theory. And so we're going to talk color theory for a little bit, and then we'll come back to the palettes. These color swatches we're going to be creating today look very bold, rich, and vibrant. But as you know, by simply adding more water, you can create soft, delicate florals, color that's bold and vibrant, and anything in between. We're going to mostly be working with our three primary colors for the swatches we create today. But later in this video, you'll see I also talk about ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta, because both of these colors have a place on my palette. Now the primary colors I work with, and these are like my workhorse paints. I use these three for most of my work. I've got my Hansa Yellow Deep, and this is the only yellow that I'm currently using. I've got quinacridone Rose and phthalo Blue. So I'm just going to label it with, you could say red or rose, yellow, and blue. And I'm going to show you how I go ahead and do a little bit of color mixing with these three. And understanding how these three colors interact is going to help you understand how my palettes are working. And it really just simplifies decision making for me to mainly work with these colors. So I'll move them out of the way, and I'm just going to show you what each of them looks like out of the tube. So my Hansa Yellow Deep, this is pretty much clean here. So I'll just go ahead and use it first, get a little more water in my palette. And yes, my palettes are dry. When I want really concentrated pigments, this is really convenient. You can always add more water, but sometimes I work quite concentrated with just a little water. So there is my yellow. You could go a little more heavy at this end and then rinse my brush out and just kind of get a little bit more water there. If you want to see it with a little less pigment and more water. So there's our yellow. And then I've got quinacridone Rose over here. And so I'll do the same thing. I'll go a little heavier at this side, get a little bit more of that. Kind of work my way over here, and then I'll rinse. I could have even used a second brush instead of rinsing my brush, but there you go. You can see what a beautiful rosy color that is. It's a beautiful primary red. It's a little on the pink side, which makes it a little bit more versatile, I find. And then finally, I will pick up some of my phthalo blue. And I've got that in more than one place here, and I'll explain that in a minute. So once again, the blue, and then water it down. So now what I'm going to do is start combining these colors. As you know, you can mix your primaries to make secondary colors. So this time I'm going to take my yellow, and don't mind my messiness here. I'm just doing very small color mixing. If I wanted to mix up a lot of oranges, I would clean out a well to do this, but I'm just going to go ahead and use my yellow well. I don't have too much paint in here right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and make a color that's quite yellowy. So this is yellow with a little bit of quinacridone rose. Let's even put a little more yellow in there. I could even go more yellow still. If you want to see, I want you to see that you can even have more of a golden orange than that. So you can see there's kind of a golden orange. Now we can put a little bit more of the quinacridone rose in here, and you'll see I've got more of an orange color. And then finally, I'll just take a little bit more, and you'll see I'll take a little bit more. I was going to say color that's pretty close to a reddish orange. So there's our colors that we can get. You can see some very beautiful, vibrant colors that we can get by mixing our quinacridone rose and our Hansa yellow deep. So let's go ahead and do that now with the yellow and the blue. So this time I'm just going to take a little bit of the yellow and bring it over here. I did clean out a well to do this because I could wipe that area out, but I'll just do this for now. So I'm going to start with my yellow. And then I'm bringing just a small tap of blue. Okay, that's already looking green because it's already mixing on my brush. And you're gonna see I get kind of a yellowy green mixture. Oops, tapped a little bit more than I needed for this first swatch. So I'll just mix a little more yellow in there. You can see we've got a reasonable green coming. And then finally, we'll pick up a little bit more of that phthalo blue. I think I might have enough at the side of my well. You can see we get even greener, but I can even throw a little bit more phthalo blue in there if we want. And you can see that you can get even more of a green or teal green as you continue adding the blue. And you can kind of see if you continue going this way, you could even get more of a teal. Let's do that so you can see that. Might as well see the breadth of color we can get here. Do you want to see one more step with the rose on the orange side? Let's do that too. I think we went pretty far already, but we can go just a hint more to the rose side. There we go. And you can see a beautiful range of colors that we've gotten from using yellow with either our rose or our blue. However, if we want to take yellow out of the equation, we could also just mix our rose and our blue. So I'm going to go do that over here now. So I'll quickly go ahead and put our rose and blue down once again. Now I have cleaned out an empty well in this palette. This isn't usually where I would mix this particular purple, but because I want to show you this mixture, I'm going to go ahead and show you right here. And I'll explain why I actually don't do this particular mixture as much anymore in a minute, but I do want you to see what you can achieve for purple using these same primary colors that we've been using. And so I'm going to go ahead and just do that over here. So there's my quinacridone rose. And I'm going to go ahead and bring a little bit of my phthalo blue into it, maybe a little bit more. We want kind of a nice balance here of a purple. So I'm going to come in here, just paint that purple color in the middle. Probably actually have a little more rose. And we have a purple. And now if I want to mix my rose, more of my rose in here, I can get a purple that's a little bit more on the rosy side. This is so dark you can barely see it, isn't it? I'm going to add a little bit of water so you guys can see it a bit better. And you can see kind of more of a rosy color. And I'm going to throw a little bit more of my rose in there so you can see it get even more rose because I put quite a bit of phthalo blue in here. So I'll just come into the side. I just put a little bit of rose off my other palette. And there you see something's just a little bit more of a rosy purple color. Then we're going to come over and do the same thing with our blue and keep adding a little more blue to this well. And I'll explain why I've got things where I do, but for now, let's just go ahead and mix up this purple color. So we're seeing, we can get, okay, we're really dark I need more water in here so you can see it. You can see these pigments are so concentrated. That's the way artist pigments are. Beautiful. A little goes a long way, and it feels a little wasteful to have to rinse some of this off, but I want you to be able to at least kind of see the color under there because it's such deep concentrated pigment. So it's, you know, when you're painting, you just need more water in it. Finally, come back into this blue. Actually, I think what I have on my brush now is probably a perfect amount of blue and purple. So you can see there's a phthalo blue. Again, I'm very dark, which is beautiful. I love the fact you can get such concentrated color from these pigments, but I do want you to kind of see the colors that are there. Now, rather than thinking about mixing color in strips like this, I actually prefer to think about mixing color in a color wheel. I have a video where I do show you how to do this, and I think it's really helpful for understanding color theory. We do mix this entire wheel using 3 primaries, yellow, a rose color, and blue. And I honestly think the more you mix color and think about color in terms of the color wheel, it can really help you when you go to actually mix your paints. And you'll notice that even though these are very beautiful purples, they are somewhat limited. They could be more vibrant. And so I have added another color to my palette in addition to these 3 that allows me to get more vibrant purples. So I wanted you to see what you could achieve with these 2 colors, but we're going to talk about another color here in a minute so that you can get more vibrant purples if you're ready to branch out from your 3 primaries. But first I want to go ahead and talk about muted colors. So I'm repeating the steps that I did above where I'm mixing my red or rose with yellow together to get our orange, our yellow and our blue together to get green. And now we're going to take this a step further and talk about what happens when you want to dull a color down. And I'm going to be making a bigger mess on my palette than I usually would like to, but I want you to be able to see these concepts in action. So what we're going to be doing is mixing all 3 primaries together. So here I have my red and my yellow, and I created my orange. Now I'm going to add the blue. So when you add orange plus blue, let's put a tiny bit. I don't want too much to start with. I'm going to add a little bit of that into this color here. And you're going to see we're getting a muddier color. I'm going to make up a little bit more orange because we pulled that into the mud almost too far. So I'm going to put a little more of my red and a little more of my yellow to get a little closer to the orange. Get a nice orange going here again. And you can already see that just that little bit of phthalo blue that's still on my palette has made our orange kind of dull. So let me just show you what that looks like. We've got a dull orange, and we can continue to dull that orange down by adding a tiny bit more phthalo blue. Phthalo blue is so strong, I'm afraid I've already got too much on here, but let's see how we go. Oh, we're okay. Got a little bit more. You can see we get a little bit more brown as we come down into a little bit more phthalo blue. And sometimes it can even end up going a bit green, depending on your ratios here. So you can see we're kind of getting browner and browner as I add more of that phthalo blue. You can get mixtures like this that are a little more on the yellow side, and you can get gold mixtures like here. This is a mixture of all 3 primaries, leaning quite heavily into the yellow with a little bit of my quinacridone rose, and then the very, very smallest hint of phthalo blue, and that's how I would get that golden color there. Often when I mix my greens, I do tone my greens down because I feel like this green is too artificial for most projects that I want to work on. So to tone it down, we're going to need to use the 1 primary color we haven't used yet here. So we've got these 2 primaries, then we're going to want to add our final primary color, which is the red. So let's just go ahead and mix it right into the green that we already had here and see what color we get. Okay, we've gone too heavy already. It's gone brown. You could I could put a little more yellow and a little more blue so you can see the transition happen a little more gradually. You're going to get the idea. We're going to be turning brown again, right? We talk about muddy colors. So let's just go ahead, put a little more yellow and a little bit more blue so that we get a little bit more on the green side before we transition right into that brownish color. So I'm just putting a little bit more blue and yellow in here first. So you can see we've kind of got a dull green. We could even have been less dull if we wanted to. That's a fairly dull green. Let's just bring a little bit more yellow and blue into here and get us just a little bit brighter. Put a little bit more of that bright green with this dull green first. So you can see you don't have to go that dull that quickly. And then we can put a little more red. I obviously took too big a step with my red there at the beginning, and so we dulled things down way too fast. But here you can see we're getting some other dull mixtures. Take a little bit more red now, and yes, my palettes are getting so messy so fast. Okay, I'm adjusting this with a touch more red so that I get a little more variation between this one and the one above it. And then finally, a little more red to create a brown for this final swatch. And once again, you can create some variation by putting more blue or more yellow into these same mixtures, and you can get other dull colors. If you'd like to learn more about mixing dull colors, I'll include a link to the video where I teach how to create this neutral color wheel. You can see the outside of the color wheel is created with vibrant colors using our primaries, but then as I work into the center of the color wheel, we add gradual amounts of the third primary, or we could also call it the complementary color, in order to achieve these dull colors, which in some cases you would consider them muddy, but other times they work really well when you want to create some beautiful neutrals. I also talk about neutral color mixing in a couple of my Christmas videos, and so I will include links to those as well if you want to see me mixing colors that are dull, because the steps that I took to create these swatches could be done with any color on the color wheel. You could also repeat these steps using the red or the rose and the blue and create more dull purples, but I won't walk you through that because it's pretty straightforward. You would just do the same thing using those colors, and as we said, these are a little dull. But I'm going to share with you now how I go about creating my purples, because about a year ago, I added quinacridone magenta to my palette, and it's become one of my most favorite colors for mixing gorgeous purples. When I painted this tulip, I was still relying on quinacridone rose as my red for mixing purples. But you can see how much more vibrant my purples became when I brought in that quinacridone magenta. I feel like these purples really glow. They're super clean and vibrant. Now, you can choose to mix your purples either using the phthalo blue that we were using up here, or you can also try ultramarine blue. I do both. I find the ultramarine blue makes a beautiful purple when it's mixed with quinacridone magenta, but it's granulating, and so it gives you texture that you don't always, or I should say I don't always want. And so I will also use the quinacridone magenta with my phthalo blue. I completed a whole video on the difference between quinacridone rose and quinacridone magenta and did some color swatches here using both ultramarine blue with both of them, phthalo blue with both of them, as well as how they each worked with Hansa Yellow Deep. And at the end of the day, I wanted to keep both of these in my palette because I got better oranges with the quinacridone rose, but better purples with the magenta. Here's an example of a painting where quinacridone rose really shines. It made some beautiful colors for these strawberries, as well as these vibrant, beautiful golden colors in the fruit above. But you can also use it to create very soft, delicate pink flowers. There's times I'll use a combination of a warm color palette with a touch of quinacridone magenta. When I painted these tulips, I relied mostly on my Hansa Yellow Deep and quinacridone rose, but then you can see there was some hints of this beautiful, slightly pink color that was almost a little cool tone, and that quinacridone magenta worked perfectly for achieving that color. I did that as well with my dahlia here, where once again, I started out using very warm colors, Hansa Yellow Deep with quinacridone rose, and then I gradually built in to the quinacridone magenta colors you can see in the center of this flower. I even used both quinacridones in this rose tutorial. Most of the time I relied on quinacridone rose, but you can see those magenta colors coming up in the shadows. And I felt like I was able to achieve greater variety in my pinks without getting dull purples. But I'll be honest, as funny as it sounds, I had to adjust to having another color in my palette. So I'm going to start out with my quinacridone magenta and my phthalo blue. And we're going to mix these colors together now in this well between them. I think this is a perfect purple. You can always add a little bit of water if you want to water it down. So you can see the variation that we have there. Go a little darker at the top if you want. Then let's lean a little bit heavier into the magenta color. So put a little more magenta over here. See the beautiful color we're getting. And even more magenta. Then I'll repeat this with the blue. Actually, I'm going to pull this one a little bit closer to the purple so that the next step can be just a little more on the blue side. Again, I'll drop a little water in there so you can see the transparency of that a little bit better. When I first started watercolor painting, I was relying on ultramarine blue as my primary blue color. It makes beautiful, vibrant purples, as you can see here. I wasn't even using the magenta yet, and yet it was still incredibly vibrant when I mixed it with my quinacridone rose. The thing that's the downside is the granulation. You can see if you look really closely at this flower, there is a bit of granulation happening within my pigments. Sometimes this is beautiful and you could take advantage of that because I really like that beautiful granulation I was able to achieve in this close-up rose where I painted a little more loosely. But there's times I find that granulation to be a little bit frustrating. If you look up closely at my background here, you can kind of see where I've got a lot of texture. This is where the granulating paint has kind of pooled into the textured parts of the paper. That can give beautiful effects if you're after texture, but it can also be a little bit frustrating to work with when you're wanting something more smooth. It's because of these texture variations that happen with ultramarine blue that I ended up separating my palettes out as I painted this hydrangea tutorial. That allowed me to get my lower layers in with my ultramarine blue and have some beautiful granulation while I was working quite wet, and then come in with some more staining colors for the upper layers and details. But if you want to just get your feet wet with granulating paint, you might enjoy this more simple violet tutorial. And you can find both of these tutorials on my Etsy shop, or even this pansy that you can find right on my YouTube channel. I'll include links to all of them below. Now, if I have a very small amount of pigment in my well, I'll just use a damp paper towel and wipe the little well out. These porcelain palettes are beautiful because they're non-staining. Most of the time, it's really simple to just get all your paint out. You've got a nice clean well to work with. Might as well clean up that orange color that we had here from earlier. And if I have a lot of paint in a well that I want to clean out, I'll just transfer my paint into another well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this particular palette has most of my warmer colors, but because of some of the current projects I've been working on, some of these colors are leaning a little more into the cool than normal, and that's okay. As soon as I want more oranges and yellows, this will be the palette I'll want to work with, and I can always clean another well out, remove this green, and place it in this well, which I haven't yet discussed, but I'll talk about this in a minute. And I could even do that with this dark kind of dull purpley color. This would be a time, if I don't intend to use this color anytime soon, I would clean this well out and put it into something that's similar. So I'm looking at this palette and I see my dull neutral colors. And I like using these dull neutral colors for backgrounds or when I want something close to black. This is also a convenient way to kind of clean my palette out. And so in this situation where say I have a little bit of this dark color, but maybe I'm not quite sure if it's something I just want to completely clean out of my well with a paper towel, I might preserve the paint by doing similar to what I showed you with that green, but I'll bring it over here because I'm like, you know, this is just kind of a dark purplish color here already. And if I decide whatever color when I go to use it, I need to tweak it, I can, because I know what colors it's going to take to tweak it to the color I'm after. And then I can just use my little paper towel and wipe that well out, and it's ready to go for a more vibrant, warm mixture. And then this neutral color here might end up being a perfect color when I go to use it. And if it's not, I can always adjust it by using the concepts I taught in this color wheel. And the question I always ask is, say this color, say I'm after just a really neutral black, and in the end it looks too purple. The question I'm asking myself is, what does this color seem too much of? If it seems too purple, I know I need to cross the color wheel and add whatever's exactly the opposite of the color wheel. You can actually use either of these color wheels to ask the question. Purple is always directly across from yellow. And if my color here is too purple and I'm wanting something more neutral or black, I can simply cross the color wheel, add a little more yellow, mix it again, and then I can repeat that question. If it turns out the black starts to look green, I can go, okay, it's too green. I need to cross the color wheel, add a little more red. And so that's how I approach getting to my neutral color mixes. And it sounds complicated, but the more you do it, the more intuitive it becomes. But it's a great question to ask if you're ever struggling with getting a neutral color the way you want it. And so this particular palette, I do have my rather messy phthalo blue. I have ultramarine blue here, which is one of those colors that I honestly don't use a lot because it granulates. It's a color that deserves a lot of respect. And so I try and keep my mixtures to be all the non-granulating paints until I very intentionally want to use ultramarine blue. I hope that seeing my palettes and a little bit of my color mixing process has been helpful for you, and that this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!